If you want people to do the right thing, you need to make the right thing easy. As long as you do that, then they'll do the right thing. If I make it easy for you to report your real, genuine security posture, and I don't punish you for it, and I just let you be real with me and then share that information with others, then you're more likely to be real with me.
Yeah.
So it led to things where packages, these questionnaires, would be kicked back because the wrong color ink was used in diagrams, because the right words weren't in the right order in the right places, and just all sorts of things like that that weren't actually going to affect any security outcome. Instead of saying, these are the things we want you to check, we say, these are the behaviors that we want you to have. We want your service to have. So if I could make a security policy that just said, secure your stuff, I would do that, right? Why are audits a pain in the butt? Because of drift, because you don't know what happened over the last year, because your engineers were just doing stuff. I hope they didn't turn it off. Click the button. When an auditor comes in, a secure company should be like, yeah, cool. Like, we know everything's running the way that we want it to run. And if somebody changed their mind, there's a bunch of tickets, there's a bunch of approved code, PRs, it's been reviewed. So like, yeah, audit me, bro. No problem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GRC Engineer Podcast. This episode I'm extremely excited about. I have a very esteemed guest with me. I have Pete Waterman, the director of FedRAMP. I'm really looking to our conversation because there's been a lot of super nice and interesting changes, and I wanted to have the opportunity for him to chat through some of this and tell us how it relates to GRC engineering and all the change and how he thinks about compliance in the federal space and its future as well. So Pete, very excited to have you.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, engineering is what it's all about. So the more that we can push on this and drive engineering forward in the GRC space, the more I'm here for it.
I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this episode. FedRAMP, Ref 5 or 20X, GovRAMP or CMMC. There's a company on a mission to make them fun, and that company is called Paramify. If you're chasing your first authorization or stuck living in common hell, if you know, you know, Paramify makes it simple with the POA management and automated documentation tool. To get you started, they are offering my listeners a $750 gap assessment. Basically, they will show you where you're at right now and give you a clear roadmap or where you need to go next in one clean dashboard. Go to paramify.com/GRC to get access to their offer. That's paramify.com/GRC. And now, back with the episode. Amazing. These are the words I like to hear. So you've been in the overall kind of engineering space for a couple decades, and you've worked in the federal space, if I'm not mistaken, looking at your kind of resume and stuff for 5-6 years, but you've been overall like in engineering for a lot longer than that. And you came back August last year on the FedRAMP side. And of course, you've been making a lot of waves. I also love the transparency changes as well that we've seen, which have been like super exciting. So of course, I'm not someone that is like super deep in the federal space, more like overall GRC, but I've really seen these changes, and people I know in the space really respect all the stuff that is happening. So, you know, kudos to you for all those great changes.
I mean, yeah, that's what I'm here for. Sometimes things get a little placid in the federal space and in compliance in general. And so we've all seen this in private sector too, big enterprise. Everybody just gets comfortable with the way they're doing things, and they think that's good enough. And with an engineering background, that's never been the case, right? I spent my entire career in engineering walking into some place where everyone's like, oh yeah, this is how we do things, and going, that's insane. We can do it better. There's all this stuff that you aren't doing that we could do.
Yeah, that's what I like, is where we the kind of like two worlds cross and collide, and then, you know, that's how kind of DevOps happen, that's how SRE happen. It's like software engineers coming to a new field and just looking, oh my gosh, that's how you do things?
Yeah.
Let's find a better way.
Yeah, the parallel there with DevOps and SRE, I think, is just like, is so timely for us because it's something that makes sense to everyone. People have heard it, you know, okay, it's good. But the whole time, we should have been having security right there with us at the table. Like, it's crazy that we combined dev and ops and created this culture where developers and the people that were running the software could work together and talk to each other. But still, we then waited until the end to throw it over the fence to security. And like with my background, especially in operations, I don't understand how we let that happen. Like, it should have been DevOps with security from the beginning, like day one, because that's always like the one thing that development and operations has in common is they don't like compliance. So like, bring compliance in, work together. We should have done that. So we're doing it now, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the Best time would have been yesterday, and the second best time is today.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, so it's super exciting. What I wanted to kind of get started on with you is kind of the backstory. Of course, you came in last year. Lots of changes happened since then, and kind of what pushed you towards looking forward to that change and kind of setting the foundations for. We'll speak about 20x and all these changes and how did it come about.
Yeah, the high level story here is after 20 years in, progressively more responsible positions in tech, engineering, leadership, operations, I really focused on delivery. I got to a point where I was starting to feel I wasn't getting what I wanted out of the daily grind. Everything was optimizing. How do we get like this click-through rate 3% higher? And it just wasn't inspiring. There was a point where I wanted to do something that was more fun, more exciting. I got into this, enrolled in this program called the U.S. Digital Service, which at the time was this big program based out of the White House that brought tech folks into government to do short-term tours of duty. And I said, all right, I'll take a break. I'll do this. Made it past, got hired, came in as a cloud expert for a 1-year tour of duty. That became a 2-year tour of duty. That became 3 years. And then I kind of wanted to stick around a little bit more because after the first 3 years, I kept running into FedRAMP and I kept running into all of these policy and cultural things that were slowing down adoption. Like it was, what I started to find was everyone had this idea of what was legal. They would say the law says you have to do this, the law says you have to do that. But as soon as you started pulling the thread, right? As soon as you like open up the source code and you go to the law, you're like, that is not what this subroutine does at all. Like this is totally, you guys completely misunderstood this code. And approaching it like that got me really excited to understand more what goes beyond that culture, what builds that up. I worked with this organization inside the government called the Technology Modernization Fund, which is loosely analogous to like a VC funded thing inside the government for modernization projects, where people
Nice.
would say, I've got this old crappy system. I want to build a new system. Will you give me money for it? And we would sit there, and most of it was us coaching them through, okay, the plan that you have to build that new system is kind of terrible. You need a better plan. You need something that's more modern, that uses like real, modern processes. And again, always FedRAMP, cloud services, et cetera. Around that time, 4.5, almost 5 years in, I just kind of just felt like it was too much. I wasn't doing tech anymore. I was doing
Yeah.
policy. And it wasn't just policy, like, how does our company do this? Is how does this law interact with this memorandum, interact with this cultural thing? And I just wanted to go somewhere where I didn't have to do that, where I didn't have to justify a technical decision. I could just make one because
Yeah.
that's where I came from. So I did that. I quit the government, took some time off. And while I was having my time off, before I was looking for a private sector gig, this FedRAMP job opened up. And I remember sitting there just talking with my partner. I think that might be like the coolest, like, I think I was made for that job. I think all my time in government and tech would make me perfect for that job, but I don't want to do that job because that job will suck. And it will just be all politics and all drama. And I decided I was going to apply for it anyway. So I just yeeted off my resume. I didn't even do a lot of work to make it look pretty, which is really important for federal stuff. Somehow I made it past the screens, got to interview, got the job offer, started the job, and was like, yeah, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be. Within the first month, I had letters from all these organizations. I was in a congressional investigation. I was in like 3 Office of Inspector General investigations. Like everybody hated FedRAMP. I was getting yelled at so much. And it just was like, why did I do this? But I came back to do it because I wanted to change all of those things. So I had to spend the first couple months coming to grips with everything that everybody hated about FedRAMP, violently hated about FedRAMP, and start figuring out, working with experts and other parts of government, how do we solve these problems? Because what had been happening before is that you had a lot of people that were just kind of saying, yeah, okay, we get it. You hate us. You hate this, but like, it's important. And like, we'll improve it incrementally. And that wasn't going to fly. Like we had to take an engineering approach to this and like go down there at the root cause and figure out what we need to build differently instead of just trying to tack on another $50 million and another 200 people and think that was going to solve it.
Super interesting. Super interesting. In a sense, like it's like your, as you said, the combined experience made you ready for this, but the way you approach it is also very different to the way it was probably approached before. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
how your previous experience is really kind of, really helping because you see things through a different lens. Maybe that's someone that came through this like FedRAMP compliance through and through because they probably, in a sense, they can be more narrow because they're more operational and they, you justify your to yourself that the way you've done things is probably right and it works in your context. And what you said about like all those memorandums and all those documents outside, when you're outside federal space, is very fascinating. Like there's people like CMMC in other areas. I'm like, wow, this is like, there's a lore to this, it's like, it's very
Yeah.
dense and complex.
The whole thing is a little bit insane too when you think about it from the perspective of private sector. Government agencies are different companies. Like everybody's saying in the US government, people are like, oh, it's the US government. Nah, dude, it's 2 million people. It's 500 plus agencies with thousands of different people, different authorizing officials and executives with different policies and procedures. So when you sit here and you say there should be a program that if one agency says it's okay, then the whole government it should be good for. That's like saying there should be a program where if if Meta buys it, then Google doesn't even look at it. And Google is like, cool. If Meta buys it, I'm in. OpenAI is like, oh, sweet. Like Meta and Google are in, I'm in. Like, and nobody looks at the package. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. But that's what we're trying to navigate here is how do you create a process that is good enough for that? And, in private sector, I know that's not how people operate. I did every single company I did business with. It doesn't matter if you got a SOC 2. It doesn't matter whatever. They're going to send you a questionnaire. It's going to be a 40-page questionnaire. And it's going to be different questions every time. And you're going to maintain like a document that has all the questions you've been asked before so you can copy and paste. But every time you do business with a new company, there's new questions. So how do you build something for the government that somehow answers all of those questions at the same time, but also makes them meaningful, makes them important, makes them valuable, and takes away the burden of everyone having to read all those questions? Because that's the worst part, right? It's not like being on the other side when you're buying something and this company comes back with your 40-page questions and it's 800 pages of gunk that you have to sort through one by one. No, like that was not working for anybody. It doesn't work great in private sector, but it was definitely not going to scale to government.
Yeah, I've answered unfortunately hundreds of these, so yeah, I know exactly the pain. So yeah, it really really hits hard. And so now you're in, and you kind of working on those changes. So of course, the kind of flagship kind of program you've pioneered is like 20x, right? FedRAMP 20x, which is like a faster path to being FedRAMP authorized. And when we look at the scale, I think the last time I was looking at the numbers, like in just 6 months you had over 100 compared to it took years and years and years to get just a couple of hundred.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things. There's two things going on there. So just like for people in the FedRAMP space, or people that aren't in the FedRAMP space. So if you're listening to this as someone that's interested in GRC engineering, you don't understand what we're talking about here. Some quick background, which is that effectively there are some rules and memos in the U.S. government that if one agency, so like one company, invests in following the security process for a cloud service. So we're going to buy, Figma. They spend a whole bunch of money working with Figma to answer those questions, do those questionnaires, et cetera. Once that agency completes those questionnaires, they need to share that information with FedRAMP, and then FedRAMP shares that information with every other agency. So it's supposed to kind of reduce the burden because I can just look at what the other agency asks and have special questions. And then FedRAMP kind of grew a bit where it started adding its own rules on it and its own kind of structure to all of that to make it more effective and efficient and reusable. And what we found was that instead of making it more effective, efficient, and reusable, it created a whole bunch of additional requirements that didn't apply to everyone. And so you have this situation where if you try to make something that will satisfy every single InfoSec official at the top 500 Fortune 500 companies, it's not going to be easy and
Yeah.
it's not going to be pretty. And it's going to have a whole lot of crap in it that like 490 of those don't care about at any given point. So there was a period of time a couple of years ago where a law was passed that changed what FedRAMP was. And it's really weird how this works in government. So before it had been a memo saying this is how you do it, and then a law was passed which changed it. But it took a long time for those changes to start to take effect because you got to figure it out. You got to start to tell people about it. But one of the key things that started right away was that FedRAMP had got built up into this program that if it went through FedRAMP, it had to be perfect, absolutely perfect, no risk acceptance at all, perfect. And that led to a cultural issue within FedRAMP itself where perfection was fetishized beyond security or beyond risk management. It led to things where packages, these questionnaires, would be kicked back because the wrong color ink was used in diagrams, because the right words weren't in the right order in the right places, and just all sorts of things like that that weren't actually going to affect any security outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we started to modernize the program at the beginning of this year, there was a twofold approach. One approach was focused on being more accepting of non-security impacting errors in the assessment process and being willing to put something forward and put something through with potential security problems, because it's ultimately up to the agency that uses it. Kind of a classic example of this is a cloud service that used another third-party cloud service for telephony, for incoming phone calls. That cloud service was not secure. So typically in a FedRAMP mindset, you'd say you can't use that. It's not secure. But if you're using it for phone calls from the public, who cares? Because they're coming over their phone provider anyway, and it's not secure. If you're using it for internal government calls, then it matters a lot. So we just, instead of saying, no, you can't use that service, we just put a note in there that said, hey, make sure you only use this with communications coming from the public, because you got an insecure source in the middle. As long as you keep everything insecure all the way to the point where you care about it, you're good. So that is what let us really do 100 more a lot faster, is that we stopped spending a year and a half arguing with people over nitpicky, stupid things and started just seriously sitting down and saying, let's write a note that warns agencies about this thing that we found, and then we'll all move on. So that was what we did with the old process. And that old process, which is called Rev 5, still kicking, going to be around for years. Too many companies have invested too many billions of dollars for us to turn that off. But we want something new. We want something better. We want something, like you said, that was faster, but not just faster for cloud services, but faster for agencies. We want something where a small GRC team of 2 or 5 or 10 people can manage 400 cloud services being used across their agency. In order to do that, they can't have spreadsheets. They can't be doing monthly calls. And so that's the 20X process. And that's the thought behind 20X is we're patched the issues with the Rev 5 process, but that's kind of on a legacy path now. And from a product perspective, we're like, okay, we can't turn all that infrastructure off. Too many of our customers are on it. But we're going to build something new and we're going to start getting customers on it. And eventually at some point, the market's going to win out. And, if the new one, everybody starts switching to that, then we start to say, hey guys, this old one's costing us too much to maintain. We're going to have to turn it off soon. We've all seen this in tech and products, et cetera. Why not do it the same with policy?
Yeah, very interesting. So it's there's two different kind of swim lanes at once. So there's the new option and kind of doing some modernization on the older option. Yeah, is it? People spoke about the memo 2415, right?
That's
Being
right.
kind of kickstarting some of that work as well. So yeah, what's interesting about what you said, you give a very good example around the telephony solution. It's the risk-based approach, right? I think it's you really need to understand what's the criticality of the data that is transiting through the tool, and can you risk accept potentially less state-of-the-art security posture, which is weird because from my experience understanding FedRAMP environments, often they're completely gate kept and in a completely air gapped. So it doesn't really reflect the company's security posture, quote unquote, because you have a purpose built environment for it.
Yes. And that's one of the biggest, most significant problems and M2415, that memorandum that reset FedRAMP policy in response to the new law, Like that was the number one big focus of it, was stop incentivizing companies to build separate things for the government, because when they do that, it's crappy. It's not as good. And then we create all these rules that mean they can't update it. And so we're sitting here, we're all like on the government versions of things. And you Google, how do I share this like with this person? And you get this set of instructions and you try to do it. And you're like, oh, those features don't exist in the government version. It's like, it's so exhausting. Like we want the same stuff everybody else has. That's what we deserve. Like, why is the US government using junky, crappy, custom built stuff for it in the name of security? When like, I understand if you're using it for missile systems or something, but we're talking about corporate office work. Like 99% of what the government does is the same as anything that's done at any other company.
Yeah, it's really why that, I think that change needed to happen is just because you incentivize like kind of that completely brand new stuff on the side. And then, companies that like, especially thinking, new innovative solutions, they might not like be able to like kind of have that cost to create this new infra. And they can't scope in the whole infrastructure to be FedRAMP because they understand the potential liabilities and like the
Yeah.
scrutiny. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the faster path to
Like,
innovation in a sense.
it's absolutely, that is how you get there. And part of why, like when you take a step back and you say, okay, if I'm going to have to create a government process that somebody has to go through in order to prove their security and compliance, because it's not to force you to do something different. It's like, hey, you need to prove what you're doing to us. So if we're sending a company through that and we want to send a startup through that has 10 people, 15 people, something like that, I want it to be something they will learn from. I want it to be something that they will come through, and instead of being pissed off that they finally got it done, they will think their tech is better. The way that they've implemented things is better. They will have approached a bunch of stuff. I joke sometimes that if I could put requirements that said buy every single engineer a Ferrari, I would put that in the requirements, because that's how I want the engineers to be approaching this. So like this idea of, how do I get the engineering capability I need out of these requirements? And that's the difference between security and compliance, to my mind. Security is about making it better for everyone, including the engineers, making the product better, making the way that you develop it better, reducing the phone calls that you get on the weekend, meaning you're not constantly worried that there's going to be an incident. Every single time, in my experience, every single time some sort of incident happened due to, in a major service, due to something relatively silly in retrospect, I guarantee you there have been some engineers at that company for years saying, boss, we shouldn't do it this way. We're going to get popped. Like, we should be doing canary testing before we deploy something globally. And the boss is like, that's not worth it. We don't want to do that money. So if I set a rule that says, yeah, do what your engineers say, and if they say you need to do canary testing, do canary testing, then it's my fault and not the engineers. It's FedRAMP's fault, not the engineers' fault, but the engineers get what they want, the business benefits, and the government gets secure services.
Yeah, no, that's what I love about the vision. And to kind of dive a bit deeper on that. So you said, speaking about FedRAMP 20X, that it's supposed to be like cloud native and simple to automate, and it's an easy way for companies to kind of demonstrate how the controls are operating, so they can get authorized. How would you say is like the main differences between that approach and the traditional approach to which they demonstrated like how controls were operating? So I've heard about POAMs and SSPs and this whole process. And how does it mean, like, kind of GRC engineering concepts kind of getting into the federal space?
Conceptually, control checklists are awesome. They help people understand, like, hey, this is what you need to look at, what you need to do. But they're only applicable and they're only useful when everything is the same or it kind of makes sense, right? So if you take a checklist for, I don't know, starting a plane, I don't know anything about starting a plane, but I'll just say you probably get a checklist for starting a plane that tells you all the things that you're going to check. And if you go from a 747 to a Cessna, like a big plane to a small plane, if you're trying to do the 747's checklist, it's not going to make any sense. There's a bunch of stuff you don't have, you're not using it, you're not enabling it, etc. So that's kind of the first thought behind taking a different approach, is instead of saying, these are the things we want you to check, we say, these are behaviors that we want you to have. We want your service to have. So if I could make a security policy that just said, secure your stuff, I would do that, right? Like, or make good decisions. That should be a policy. But the problem is that when you have a policy that says make good decisions, you get a bunch of auditors in a room and a bunch of compliance people, and they all say, what's a good decision? It's not defined. I need a checklist for my good decision. And that's not the way it works. So take a look at cloud. So this is like the difference between cloud native and something that doesn't consider that at all, is that the way that you would configure a secure environment on Azure, and none of these uses of product terms are endorsing of any product, right? It's just, so if you're building a system on Azure, it's going to be entirely different than if you're building a system on GCP. And that's going to be entirely different than if you're building a system on AWS. There may be some analogous services, but your approach, the way that things are going to interact, the way that you control users, permissions, all of that is completely different. So instead of saying you need to do these 18 things when we configure your users, well, what is the output that we want? Well, you shouldn't allow unauthorized people to access things they're not supposed to. So that is the change, is instead of saying do these 18 things to prevent unauthorized people from accessing something, we just say prevent unauthorized people from accessing things. Like, know who's supposed to access it, inventory that, pay attention to it, give them privileges just in time, all that kind of stuff. But we're not going to come in there and look at your Azure implementation and say, that doesn't look like my AWS implementation that I've seen before, so you can't do that. And so at the end of the day, what it really boils down to, the concept of making this cloud native, is the idea of optimizing all of these requirements so that some sort of existing or able to be added API functionality on your cloud platform can answer those questions. So for my favorite example that was like in the initial launch was encryption. There's a whole bunch of rules from 853 about encryption, but ultimately it all just boils down to like turn on encryption. But there's a world where I don't, like, as a customer of a cloud platform, I can just say turn on all the encryption everywhere. And that cloud platform can offer that as a feature. And now all the encryption is turned on everywhere. And then I don't need to have somebody look and say, okay, what's going on with your S3 buckets? What's going on with your website? What's going on with your disks? What's going on with your RDS? I can just have someone say, no, I clicked the button that said, always encrypt all of my data at rest. And so I'm good. And that becomes like the assessment. Did you click the button that says encrypt all of my data at rest? Yes. Okay, we don't have to do anymore. There's no evidence. There's no screenshots. There's like, okay, cool, you're good. And none of these environments are really optimized for that, right? There's APIs, so you can pull all that information. But imagine how different compliance will be in a year when you can go in your Amazon panel and click enable encryption on everything by default and alert me when something gets turned off. And now no engineer ever worries about it anymore. Like, if you mess it up in your Terraform, doesn't matter. It gets changed on the fly during deployment. Like, your CI/CD pipeline's like, yeah, no, you're not allowed to do that. Like, that is what cloud native security is enabling engineers to make the right settings, to understand how to connect this rule to implementation, and then to actually go build it and attest to it and validate it based on what a machine says. That's what cloud is, right? Machines talking to machines. So let machines talk to assessors.
Yeah, I love that. What's interesting is, the complex checklist you spoke about, and I think some of those like NIST standards, they can be very prescriptive and get into quite a lot of details on implementation compared to like some of the more, like SOC 2, ISO, etc. They can be very high level, kind of policy, kind of process driven. But what's weird is those custom checklists is what also creates those like air gapped environments. It's just because it's so complex to follow every single line that you need an environment just built to check all of those boxes.
Yeah. I mean, think about like audits, right? And this is one of the things I think is always funny. Why are audits a pain in the butt? Like, because of drift, because you don't know what happened over the last year, because your engineers were just doing stuff. And you know that when the auditor comes, you're like, all right, we haven't looked at this for a year. I hope they didn't turn it off. Like, click the button. Oh, somebody turned it off. Like, now it's like, that shouldn't exist, right? When the auditor comes in, a secure company should be like, yeah, cool. Like, we know everything is running the way that we want it to run because we use machine rules to ensure that things are running the way we want it to run. And if somebody changed their mind, there's a documented trail, there's a path, there's a bunch of tickets, there's a bunch of approved code, PRs, it's been reviewed, and it's been shipped out with an appropriately tagged changelog, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, yeah, audit me, bro. No problem. Our engineers would love to sit down with you and show you that everything is working exactly the way they want it to work.
Yeah, it's like so it's creating those secure defaults. So you kind of always audit ready, just because you've built that from the ground up. What something I have came up to me just as you were speaking is because you give a lot more leeway. Because of course, like every environment is different, and the way you implement the same control is different across. Like you said, cloud providers is very true. How do you ingest those different ways through which your like the companies that are assessed are testing those controls differently?
This is a thing that I think is really fascinating from an engineering perspective, is that as far as I remember in my career, I think probably in the 90s, for the first time in the early 90s, I was writing programs that took data of one type and transitioned it into a different form that I could process. In fact, in the late 90s, I was using a thing called Pete markup language that I had written in Perl to do
Wow.
like this data center thing. And it was like because I was like, XML was way too complicated as that was coming out. I couldn't understand it. I don't know, but a Pete markup language, right? Structured machine readable stuff. You could go in, you could pull any machine in the data center and get information back in a nominal structure. So that's what's I love about where we're at with 20x is we basically said, we're not going to define the standard for how this reporting needs to work up front. Rather, you tell us. You have your engineers go and build a system that reports out in a way that makes the most sense for you and your business and for your engineering team that benefits them, for your security compliance team that benefits them. You build something for your business, and then you export that information to us. Now, right now, from the FedRAMP side, that's obviously complicated, right? In our phase 1 pilot, we've got 26 different submissions, and there's about 20 different ways that folks have
Yeah.
done it. So that doesn't create a sustainable path. But what's missing is that once we know what we want, we can provide code that just takes all these things and pushes it together. And generally, like, people will trend towards a more similar thing, and we'll start having standards, and we'll have competing standards, and we'll have third-party tools, and like Google will have their output look like this, and Amazon will have their output look like this. And then some third-party tool is going to come in, and every time a new major cloud service provider makes a change to the way their data is reported, they're going to work over the weekend and put a new plugin on Monday that is like now compatible with Amazon, FedRAMP format B, and we'll all benefit from that. So it's at a point where it's totally a Wild West. Everyone can do it however they want. And then we need to get to a world where I can say, I want to pick the things that I want out of this data and present it in my way. And somebody else can say, I want to take the things I want out of this data and present it in my way. And that's not that hard to get there. Like, the first thing you have to do to get there is start having all of these things.
Yeah.
So like, you can start searching through them and figure out what you want and figure out what makes sense. And that's what FedRAMP and GRC and compliance automation in general has been so stuck for the last few years on trying to implement standards. It's like, what should the standard be? Let's all agree what the standard should be. Like, no, just tell me what you think is interesting. Send it to me. I'll just grep out the stuff that I care about, and I'll ignore the stuff I don't. What's the problem?
Yeah, it's like a more empirical approach. I think GRC is very top down. In engineering as a discipline is bottoms up, because you start with the most smaller common denominator, which like could be like a function or method, and then you build up from that programs. You never start like you have an idea of what you build, but you build it incrementally.
Yes.
And it's also like similar, like those feedback loops when you taste and like when you can compile your program, and then that's where you see all the errors at runtime and all these things. And in GRC, like ISO, for example, between two versions is 9 years or more. And you think about it, what
What?
changed? It's like even the version that is the latest, often it was actually written 2 or 3 years before it was shipped. So technically, it's already out of date by then.
Yes. And it doesn't take into account new technologies, new methods, new capabilities. So instead, I think it should be the other way. I think that security and engineering teams should be leading forward, doing the crazy stuff that you want to do, report out on it, explain why it's secure, explain why it makes sense. And then we'll come behind you and say, okay, yeah, like, cool. Thanks, right? Like, we're still having endless debates. If you go into, I don't know what's like in industry at this point for this one, but in government, the amount of argument over the security of virtual networking and like logical networking and Kubernetes and like all this kind of like service clusters and containers. And it's like, we're acting like somebody invented this last week. And everybody just goes back to, oh, physical network. I need a physical network cable, like, and it needs to be plugged in a physical different thing. Otherwise, I can't trust that it's different. And it's crazy. So the idea is flip it around the other way. Just tell, like, if your team thinks that's secure, tell us why. Show us the industry white papers. Show us like the best practices stuff. Demonstrate to it, and then, oh, okay, that's acceptable. Instead of no, it has to be configured the way that we saw it back in 2012 when the last one of us like did. I mean, it's also the fact that I say this a lot, and this is turning into a little bit of a rant session here, but like so many of these security policies just across the board, they're written by people that have never actually built a thing. And it's not always a problem, but it really is, because it really can be a problem if you're not paying attention. Because it's easy to just say, well, I think everyone should be 6 feet tall if you're 6 feet tall. It just doesn't make sense. You can't make that rule. And that's what happens with policy folks is they're like, well, yeah, I mean, we should make them tell us the location of every single one of their software engineers in the world. I think that would help with security. And you're like, have you ever tried to run a multinational company that's pulling like I don't know the location of every software engineer on the internet, and that's effectively what you're asking for. No, I will not give you that. That is an insane compliance request. Do not ask for that. Like, that's the type of thing that a practitioner can understand and be in a room and say, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that for you. But if you don't have those practitioners, it makes a ton of sense. Everybody's like, yeah, of course we should know where everyone lives. Like, it's so simple. We'll just ask them. We'll just keep an inventory of where everyone in the world lives. That's got to be easy.
Yeah, I agree with that, with like the abstraction layer from like who's actually writing the policies to people that actually implement the policy in real life. There's massive drift, and I think it's a common issue just because often there's two people that have completely different careers, and they just don't interchange information and try to understand the word from the other people's lenses because they're convinced they already know the truth.
Yeah.
So,
and just to be clear, I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than the other or not, right? But like, I don't want a Formula One mechanic telling me how like I should maintain my motorcycle. Like, it's just a totally different skill set, background, etc. They're awesome at what they do, but I'm going to ride my motorcycle the way I'm going to ride my motorcycle.
Yeah, no, 100%, and I fully agree with that. What's interesting is like, because you ingest potentially like evidence coming in so many different ways, you kind of have this interesting time where you can figuring out like how to formalize, and maybe like this type of thing in like that control would probably would look like for something similar to that in most cases, and trying to build that. What I'm thinking around this is understanding how FedRAMP works. Like, agencies, they still kind of have to take the risk at the end, even if they're FedRAMP authorized. And, of course, there's like two versions of Rev 5 and 20X. How do you kind of work on, because there's also this new way of gathering evidence and how you rate that evidence. How do you then ensure that this potentially can get picked up as like a risk-based decision by the agency that will make the ultimate decision on onboarding the software?
Yeah. So you start by realizing that it's a very long multi-year process, and that the Rev 5 based process is called Rev 5 because it's the fifth revision of a thing that's been going on for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is one of the things that I find sort of fascinating with industry is, like, I would say if we get to where there is wide scale adoption of this new method in the next 3 or 4 years, that will be a massive success, because it's a really silly thing, but it's called X because originally we were going to have it named a different version each year. And then we're like, that's silly. Instead of having it that, we should call it X. And then somebody was like, well, what happens in 2030? Like, oh, so it just needs to be 20X. But that's the reality, is that it's going to be every year for years with slow incremental improvement. And the goal isn't in 6 months to get rid of Rev 5 and have everybody use this new process. That is an insane, wrong-headed way to change something of this scale, right? It has to be slowly. It has to be market-based. And by market-based, I mean not like free markets. I mean the demand of what agencies have and what they can do. If an agency and a company wants to spend a whole bunch of money to do something that doesn't produce good, secure outcomes, because the current paperwork-based process, it's point in time based, does not produce good, secure outcomes, I'm not going to tell them they can't do that. Like, I want them to improve their security. So we're really focusing on improving continuous monitoring within the Rev 5 process over time. But cool, you want to keep doing that? You want to spend $300,000 every time you want to use a cloud service? Go to town. Be my guest. Over here, there's going to be a lot of agencies that like they want to use stuff. Right now, the government does not use small cloud services for 50 of their people because it is not worth their time to invest in it. And it's not worth the time of these companies to invest in it. Just we're talking today about a major cloud service that is used by tons of people. It's a great cloud service. It charges like $10 per user per month. They're not going to go through FedRAMP. We've got 40 users. They're going to use it. And I was like, we need to have 4,000 users using it in order for that company to pay the salary of one good security engineer. Like, of course, we can't have that work.
Yeah.
So there's a point where if it's easier, if it's cheaper, folks are going to adopt it based on that. But also, I keep coming back to the reality. Like, that's an outcome. Cheaper and easier is an outcome of relying on machines and getting rid of all of the extra nonsense. But the real important outcome is security, because I actually know what your stuff is. Anyone that has, going back to this practitioner versus not, anyone that's actually been a practitioner knows that when the auditors go home, things get changed. Like, I don't care where you work, that happens. It's just a fact. And if a policy says, oh, you have to tell like significant changes, if policy says you have to tell the government every time you change something, then before you change something, you're going to have a meeting to decide whether or not you're going to tell the government about it. And a lot of times you're going to say, I'm not going to tell the government about it because it's going to be too much of a hassle. And you're going to go do it anyway. And so you have to acknowledge this reality that process where you're asking people to testify over paperwork on a point in time basis, it doesn't actually reflect security. What does? Machine output. If I am getting data from you on a day-to-day basis that shows what your encryption status of all of your servers and all of your buckets and all of your stuff has been over time for the last 365 days, I can say, okay, you consistently keep 95% of your stuff encrypted, you pass. That is so different from a check. Here's a spreadsheet I produced. Like, what is that spreadsheet? I don't even know if that's real. You can just do like ChatGPT generating a spreadsheet of 8,000 items and say it's secure. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So yes, faster, yes, cheaper, yes, easier, but also way more reality-based about what your security posture really is.
Yeah, because you really see that kind of compliance theater in a sense where like all those activities only exist to satisfy the auditors or like, the assessors, but they're not providing any security value because they're not stemming from security anyway. It's not, the pipeline is broken. There's no relationship between those two anyway.
Yeah, if the company isn't using it, then the company is never going to like properly invest in it. So if the company is only using its audit process to satisfy auditors, that doesn't provide value. If the company is using its audit process to maintain its posture and security and empower business decisions and know what's going on, then it's a meaningful process.
Yeah, it's what stuff like we see the same in the private sector is like where like some frameworks like you assess yourself against them because you need them for sales or for any other purpose, but you already know deep down that they don't provide security value, and the security engineers also know. And what's challenging is how the GRC team can focus more internally, kind of creating the security baseline that the security team wants versus the compliance baseline that auditors want. It's really that change.
And think about all the stuff that like a good security team, not even a GRC engineering team, but just a good security team or even good software engineers. Think about all the stuff they're doing to improve the security of their systems and their infrastructure and their processes that are never going to get measured by a typical compliance process because somebody didn't write a control for it. But that matters too. Like that almost matters more is every time somebody says, hey, I think this would actually make it safer, better, faster, smoother, and you implement that. How do we encourage that? How do we build on it?
Yeah. A very common example in private sector is like stuff like threat modeling. Often it's in almost none of the standards, but it's super critical, especially in product and application security space. And it's an amazing way to kind of understand the potential pathways and like the kill chain. But if compliance doesn't mandate it, should you do it? Yeah,
Yeah.
because you care about
Yeah.
security.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's like part of what we're trying to change the assessment process in 20X to be based on that is sort of, we're not going to say you have to do threat modeling. It has to look like this. It has to be done every Tuesday, right? We'll say, hey, we think threat modeling is a good way to demonstrate security. And if you have a secure service, you might put some time and effort into this. What are you doing about threat modeling? And then you get to tell us. One company says, oh, we don't do that. We go, okay, cool. Some other company says, oh, yeah, man, we got a threat modeling team. We're out there doing research on the dark web. We're like doing this. We got to pay the subscription. We're like, oh, you get like 50 points. Like, nice.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. And then they say, oh, but also we let people log in from anywhere in the world. And we're like, okay, minus 15 points. But if you're threat modeling, how does that offset? Like, okay,
Yeah.
you're still good. So like, I don't know, how do we build that where those decisions are rewarded? And that is also a key. Like we're going to start seeing more and more of that with 20X. And we're starting to see that with some of these FedRAMP policies that we've put out recently, where we've taken away this concept of a bar, like a threshold, right? You must be this tall to enter. If you're this tall, you're good. Nobody's going to care how much taller you are. And a lot of people insist that if we do that, everyone's going to try to sneak in shorter. If we get rid of that bar and we just say, show us like your security posture, people are going to, oh, FedRAMP doesn't require me to do any of this stuff, so I'm not going to do any of this stuff. Great. As far as I'm concerned, I'm kind of okay with that. We'll give you FedRAMP, we'll assess you, and we'll say, this company's security is terrible. They don't care. Their data's all over the internet. It's a total cluster, just like bad security. But maybe somebody wants to use that. I don't know, like one of my, like maybe the Department of Homeland Security wants to build memes of cute dogs on that platform and they don't care about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, why should I stop them from doing that? Like, that makes sense to me. That's fine. But then their competitor comes in and is like, hey, we do all this security. We're super awesome. We take this super seriously. We don't even have software engineers. We only have like security engineers that write software. Like we're so sweet. And we go, oh, that's cool. Maybe I'm going to use those for my top secret, like presidential cabinet only memes, right? Like where I don't want anyone to know what they are.
Yep.
I think that is fine. Why do we have to have a bar that everybody has to meet? Let's just like tell us what you're doing, tell us what your security posture is, and we'll let people decide if they want to use systems with that security posture.
Yeah, I really love that approach. Because of course, like question I wanted, I was going to ask you is like, people that were kind of authorized to the old system, so like FedRAMP Moderate Rev 5 or FedRAMP High, or whatever, and then they might say, oh, like FedRAMP 20X is lowering the bar, but you say we don't care about the bar. And I think the way you frame it is also creating kind of healthy competition, because in a sense, like depending on what's needed, right? As you said, like if it's like a less critical agency, if that really exists, focus on less like kind of top secret data, maybe they're fine with something that is a bit more risky. But then if they want something like more secure, you might have another provider that went through, and because you know which controls they have implemented, you can easily pick and choose which one you want. And that potentially creates incentives for a vendor that gadgets just passed through the first time, but like with limited security to kind of bolster up the posture so they can sell to these agencies as well.
Yeah, I think that first of all, everybody, like this is just a fact, right? Anyone in an established market is going to want to pull the ladder up after themselves. They're going to say, anybody that comes after me isn't as good as me.
Yeah,
it's not fair. It was hard for me while you're making it hard for them.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons why we didn't explicitly change and just get rid of it, because then we would have screwed over a lot of people. But this way, we're going to let people in a different path. And what started out, a lot of companies were like, that's unfair. We don't like that. It sounds like what you're doing is crazy. That's not good. Then we started to actually show what we were talking about when we said that. And we realized it's not about making it easy. It's about really aligning our assessment process with the security practices that a good company is already doing. And that has created this fascinating shift where now we have all these companies that have invested tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands, depending on your size, into the old process. They're going, I want to do that process because that's the way I run my business and that's the way my tech works and that's the way my engineers do things. And it will be expensive and kind of painful to switch at the beginning, but then it will be better for me and it will make more sense. But then the same problem is, well, then you fire your whole government compliance org because you're just, so the government compliance org is, those people are kind of in the middle feeling a little like, I don't know how I feel about this. And so they're kind of incentivized to go in. Agencies like won't like it. And then you have the advisors, like keep in mind, in an ideal world, we'll never have this world, but in an ideal world, nobody would have to pay someone to understand how to do security, and certainly not domain expertise in this government stuff. So we're talking about if we get to a world where an engineer can read a blog post or a Substack article on securing their thing, go into their dashboard on AWS, click a couple buttons, and now they're 90% of a FedRAMP authorization. There's a whole lot of consultants, a whole lot of advisors, and a whole lot of other people that are not going to be happy about that. And so they're all sitting here kind of being like, how do I fit into this new environment? Like, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but like, it's going to be a big change. And until I've been saying, I said this recently, that there's a quote that's going around quite a while, sort of like slowly and then all at once. Like, that's what it feels like with this change is, it's going to be a while of people just going, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. And then one day we're all going to look around and go, oh yeah, this is the thing now.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah. 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 Because like for me, a big change from your approach is like you really kind of pinpointing that is a lot of the meta work that happens around like FedRAMP and that aspect, which for me is just because like you need to get so many things right that feel also pretty obscure, because I know you're more transparent, but from what I could hear from people, like before you had this group and you need to go through this group to learn about what was going on with FedRAMP, instead of this new way where it's a lot more visible, and you don't really need to be in to know what's going on in the new approach. So in a sense, you're kind of impacting a lot of people's business that might have started like kind of advising and helping.
All those insiders were never really insiders, which is what makes the whole thing annoying. Like, they just knew to send emails to info@fedramp.gov, and everybody else is like, I don't want to send an email to them because that's weird. Like, no, just send an email to info@fedramp.gov. But the reason, it's kind of maybe tangential to this, but as background, I think it's interesting from an engineering standpoint. You think about how, like, I took an engineering approach to this job, and it's not a classic engineering problem, but in government, there is an intense fear of sharing anything before a decision has been made, to the point where we have a label for it. It's called pre-decisional. And we write things that are pre-decisional down. And so if there's a Freedom of Information Act request where somebody wants information, in theory, the information that we write down that is before a decision has been made can be exempted from a lot of public oversight. It's related to a concept called candor, where if I couldn't write down my opinion about something and then be sure that it wouldn't surface, I would be less likely to write my honest opinion down, etc. So why is this relevant to FedRAMP? Well, all of this type of environment within the government has led to a historical trend of basically never promising anything, never saying anything that could be construed as a promise, and certainly never do anything that might result in somebody spending money and then saying that you said to do it. And this is something I had a very close encounter with when I first joined the government, because a couple of weeks before I started, FedRAMP had published a blog post where they said that they would do something soon. And the first email I sent a few weeks later, or actually, no, the second email I sent a few weeks later was to a cloud service provider where I explained that the government's, like the reality of soon in this context would be at least 6 to 12 months. And that email was sent to Congress, and a congressional investigation was launched.
Oh my gosh.
That involved a whole bunch of drama over the fact that like FedRAMP had lied because it was not going to happen soon. And it was this whole thing. And that led to kind of a fork a fork in the road, to reuse a metaphor that we've been talking about a lot in government this year, where everybody here at GSA said, this is why we never talk about anything publicly. You can't say anything publicly, because if you piss off the wrong person, they'll get Congress involved. It'll become a thing. And then it's a waste of everyone's time. Gummed us up for months. Or I said, we could take the other path and we could just be radically transparent, so transparent that you would have to be insane to assert that anything that we said was a promise or was an indicator, because I'm saying, I'm going to tell you what we update our roadmap every 2 weeks. I change it. I'm like, this is what I'm thinking about doing. This is how things have gone. These dates have changed every 2 weeks. And we share out all the information we can. And it's like, this is for you. You do what you want with it. If you make a decision and then later I come back and I say, yeah, we're not going to do that in October. It looks like we're not going to be able to do it till February. You don't get to say, oh, this is nonsense. Like, I planned on doing it in October. Now I'm screwed. Like, instead, you get to be happy that now you know it might be in FedRAMP or it might be in February, and you can change your plans if you want. Or if you don't like any of that, you can just wait until something is done and available. And so I think that industry struggled a lot with that at first, to have a government program, especially when doing policies, basically just like yeeting out, oh, it's going to be 2 weeks. No, my bad. 4 weeks. No, actually, it's done tomorrow. Like, that freaks people out. But the whole point is, on a meta scale of the next year or 2 years, you will never wonder what FedRAMP was doing. You'll never wonder why it took so long for something to happen or why something happened faster. And you will just have complete access to everything so that you can make your own decisions. And so far, it's been really successful, and I'm really happy about it. And instead of getting mean letters summoning me to Congress, I get nice letters from people saying, like, we appreciate, like, we don't like that you're not doing it as fast as you said you thought you were going to do it, but we like that you're telling us that it's not going to happen, that way, or that you're changing direction or something like that, instead of waiting for us to find out 6 months from now or a year from now. So we'll keep trying.
Yeah, I love that. I love the kind of different approach. So now I understand a bit more what you meant by the transparency and the impact it can have. It makes total sense. And then of course, like, you kind of give your roadmap more public so people know what's coming, and also like you kind of give metrics and stuff of what already been done. Of course, to do all this, and we spoke about how you test controls, etc. Like, you need to leverage state-of-the-art technology yourself to make sure you can run this. And I want to learn more about, of course, AI, right? And how all the technologies are being leveraged to ensure you can keep up with the speed of change and also the new ways of receiving evidence.
Yeah, AI is awesome. I ran engineering in an AI company before I came to government back in the earlier days. There's so much that you can do with it, but I'm not particularly stoked about sort of what I call adversarial AI in the compliance game. I don't want some company using AI to generate the perfect narrative that a different company will use their AI to be like, yes, that description was exactly what we want. We love it. At that point, you've removed the engineers, right? I care about the engineers. And so where I'm really excited to see AI building up is helping people get access to the information they need to make decisions. Like, if you're an engineer and you're trying to do something 2 years ago, if you were an SRE reconfiguring some system, the amount of complexity involved in trying to determine if that would mess with your compliance certification is deep, deep, deep now. But now you can build that into the pipeline to the point where when you check in that change in Terraform, there can be a rule that just says, oh no, like, looks like this would break this key security indicator that FedRAMP wants. Like, are you sure you want to do it? If so, yes, click here to input your thing. And then we have the nice little agentic pipeline go through. Is that reason valid? Did it get associated correctly with these people? Can they justify it, et cetera? So I see it as like a tool for engineers to help them deliver more secure outcomes. I don't want AI in the compliance game as
Yeah.
far as generating that stuff. But it's going to be really, really impactful also with vulnerability detection and response. Like, it is the next level of automation there. You can do a lot with a rules engine of if it's this type of system, if it's that, if it's this, but starting to feed in more intelligent background to an LLM in order to say, hey, really, what you know of this, how does it flag for you, is actually kind of cool. So the other thing is that I'll just say right now, I think AI is kind of reminds me a bit of like NoSQL when we went from like relationship based databases to things like MongoDB and stuff like that were coming out. And a lot of people said that's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. And then a whole bunch of people just massively over adopted it and switched from like good row and table based stuff to like and then that caused a backlash. Like somewhere we're going to align at a point where it doesn't mean that it's bad, but every engineer you run into from that era, they'll be like, I hate MongoDB. Oh, I love MongoDB. I hate Postgres, right? So I think we're going to see that happen with AI right now, is where we're going a little too crazy on the just throw LLMs at everything. But once the engineers start really applying it and using it and paying attention to it, it's going to start to be a useful tool, and then the tech will adopt. Also, I mean, when it comes to generating cool images, it is so much fun. So you
I
gotta
approve
have
this use
some fun.
case. Yeah, I agree with you. I think what's been challenging is often the prototype or like the POC. Everything looks amazing. All those agents, they run all this for you. And then once you try to make it work at the enterprise level and with your use case, often, especially with agentic added to that. So agentic is like a lot more autonomous, but it means more error rates, workflow steps, which can break at any point. And I think like something very basic, very simple, where LLM has very limited impact, but the right one is really what you said about like kind of checking for changes in Terraform and like making sure you're going to have that additional data layer. Like that's really where it kind of helps at the decision point, and it makes like gives you additional insights before you make that decision. But it's like very targeted, very micro. And what you said about kind of documentation built by AI being reviewed on the other side by AI, I think it's very true, because the first thing I was thinking when I was like the new LLM and how it works in compliance, I was like, hey, for like regulated spaces, they can just like spin up like hundreds of pages of narratives and everything they need.
Yeah. That was the dream. That was everybody's dream last year, was like, we can use AI to generate a 1,000 page system security plan. And then the other guys can use AI to read that 1,000 page system security plan and look for faults. And nobody was like, don't think this will work.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and it's two layers of abstraction that shouldn't exist. If you remove both and then you directly connect, then it makes no sense to have that.
Yeah. It's almost like, just give me your prompt. That's it.
Yeah.
Just send me your prompt and I'll assess your prompt. What were
Yeah,
you going to ask the
exactly.
AI to do?
That's exactly it. Like I can run it. Just give me the data, I run the prompt. Instead of you building 200 pages, I have to build a system to ingest and then review using a prompt as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can really see that as like, one of the wrong usage of AI, where you think you're winning back time, but the more data you create with AI, the more time it takes to review, and then it's just like, LLM speaking to one another and doesn't create
How
much.
did we get to that world? I mean, it's fascinating to me that, at least in the FedRAMP space, right? This is all, everyone's like, oh, automation. Oh, we're going to automate this stuff. Everybody's like, oh, we're going to automate it. There's going to be automation. We're just going to automate. We're going to automate it for 10 years. You're, as an engineer, you're kind of like, oh, but like, why didn't we automate it then? Why are we all still talking about one day we're going to automate stuff?
Yeah.
Like, who's going to sit down and write the code, and why didn't they do it yesterday? And then somehow this got corrupted into AI will do the automation. Like, oh, AI. Well, it's like, if it was like automatable in a realistic way, some human would have spent a weekend and done it 6 months ago or 6 years ago. So the AI is not going to do that faster. We don't need the AI for it. So what is the value that AI is adding in this case? And it's not because AI sucks or anything like that, but it's just like, this was a human solvable problem if it was going to be solved. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no magic button here for this type of thing. You can't just shove all of your stuff into an LLM context window and say, is this secure? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
going to work.
Yeah. Try it at home and you'll see.
Exactly.
You'll see the answer. Yeah, 100%. 100%. I really agree with that. In terms of, so, we spoke about AI and how you leverage those technologies. In terms of we spoke about kind of 20x and, still piloting. There's like, of course, huge success in terms of number of companies that enrolled. And a lot of the pilot participants, they say, it works. It's like great new approach. Do you think like the case size and like more kind of liberty in how they then display how controls are operating is like the main drivers between that wide adoption? Do you see any other specifics that also make it so you have that like that many companies that enrolled in such a short amount of time?
I mean, the cynic in me is going to say the reason so many companies got involved is because they got convinced that they would have this simple, really easy way to just do this thing really quick, and that they've been trying to do and spending millions of dollars, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, screw it, I'm going to do it." And that's clearly what we got. Just to be clear, we did get some submissions that were very clearly did not attempt to embrace the concept of FedRAMP 20x. Lots of screenshots of evidence. We're like, we want the API. Like, this is a screenshot of an API output in a terminal. I don't think this is the right way to do this. But, people have to learn. But on the other side, it was what I think really, really inspired people was the freedom behind the KSIs. It was, how do you create an engine? This is why I'm trying to push it at least. Like, how do you create an engineering solution that demonstrates this? So instead of sitting down and having a bunch of business people who have never looked at the configuration of something, write something nice, how do you get to where your engineers are building something cool, where they're taking the tools that they use to report on their own stuff and shove that into the compliance report? That's helpful. That's causing a lot of people to get excited about it. And I think as we go into the next phase, we're going to see more of that. We're kind of doubling down on that. We're really pushing into this idea of, hey, you really need to have code that automates the creation of this validation. Now, one of the things that I talk about is there's a KSI, key security indicator, in there that is basically says your security program has to be funded commensurate with the importance of your thing. And you can expect the very first thing, a bunch of compliance people sat down and they said, how would I attest to that? And they're like, oh, let's get a letter from the CFO that says, a security program has plenty of money. It's great.
Yeah.
And then they submitted that to us and we're like, okay, that's not, that would have worked for a traditional compliance thing, right? Like that's what so sit down, get your engineers, and I'm not like talking about engineering saviorism here. It's not that engineers are always the best and they're the ultimate. I mean, you're people that take that mindset. So there are designers that have an engineering mindset. There are product people that have an engineering mindset. People that are focused on like understanding the underlying issues and delivering on them rather than meeting a statement that was given by somebody else. That's the compliance mindset. How do I meet this bar? Okay, so if you have to demonstrate that you have invested appropriately in a security program, your engineers are going to sit down, your designers, your product folks, like they're all going to sit down and start thinking about these. Okay, how many security engineers do we have for every software engineer? When there's architecture review, do we have a automated system that shows that someone from a security organization signed off on that architecture review? Does that take place? Is security approving things before it's pushed to prod, before the first PR, like back when it's in the spec? Or is security approving things after an assessment, after it's been rolled into production? Like you have all these different ways where you can demonstrate that you care about security based on just the actions that take place within the systems that take place. And then the hope is that creates an engine where people talk to each other and they go, actually, if we started measuring how many of our PRs had somebody from the security team review it, and it turns out none of them ever reviewed PRs. So maybe we need to like change this up a little bit, get some more folks in there, train them up on this, get it done. And now you've improved the security outcome of your system just by creating a measure where your engineering team, where your product team said, we think this is a measure of security. Then you started measuring it, you realized you didn't meet it, so you changed your security. That like the KSIs are appealing to those people. The FedRAMP 20X is really appealing to the delivery folks. The compliance folks, they'll take it or leave it. But the delivery folks, they're like, oh, this is how I do things.
Yeah.
Give me a problem and I will figure out how to solve it. Don't tell me the solution that I have to use to solve it. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of uptake.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, even in the broader kind of GRC, especially the compliance space, it's always been the issue that, there's a non-trivial amount of work that is spent proving something we don't care about to people we don't think their input is relevant.
Yes, that's the
Like,
best description ever.
and, that's how they think. And when you have control owners like engineers or even people, whatever, when they sit in meetings with auditors, and we know what they think in their mind. They're like, we're just getting a pass with all this stuff he didn't look at. We know what's going on, but there's
Right.
only this they care about, which is fine. We have that list of IP addresses you actually wanted, even though infrastructure gets deployed every 15 minutes and get destroyed.
Exactly. Exactly. The
So
names of it don't matter. Yeah, and then going back to AI, right? We're in that world where an engineer can vibe code a dashboard that shows whatever you want in 3 minutes. So
yes,
why are we like? You can't do this. You need the engineer to actually like run code and attest to it. You can't have them show you something because they're dodgy, man. They will
yeah,
not show you what they don't want to if they
yeah.
think you're wasting their time.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And what's interesting is, with that new approach, I'm thinking, there's a lot of people that work in compliance for the federal space, and both more on like kind of external providers and like what do you call it, contractors, etc. But then like inside the agencies as well. And what do you think is the kind of the new skill set? Because let's say, okay, let's create a world where 20x is the new baseline. Like the way they'll ingest that data and the way they think through what we consider high risk, low risk, which controls we care about, it will be driven a lot more by security in practice versus like the checklist of controls. And how do you think the skill set of potentially all those existing people will have to kind of shift to accommodate that change?
In a pretty big ways. I think of the GRC. When I think about GRC, I kind of think of sort of two classes or aspects of GRC, like producers and consumers. So there's people that produce GRC information and they do GRC engineering processes. They use GRC tools and they assess a system and its security in order to produce GRC information. And then you have consumers who use the output from those tools. Maybe they're loaded into their own tools, right? To assess that and be like, oh, we like that, we don't like that, etc. And right now in the space, it's kind of like a green box, red box war where the producing team is trying to produce something that has the most green boxes and the least number of red boxes. And then the consuming team, all they're trying to do is look for red boxes. They're like, oh, I found a red box. Like, oh, and then they go and they smash the other team. This box is red. This is crazy. We want this box to turn green. And everybody argues for weeks, months, or years over how to turn that box green. And it's a simplification, but it's an important simplification because it creates a focus where you're not arguing or discussing or thinking about the security or the impact of the security on your system. You're just saying you don't like that the box is red. If that box is red in a system that like maybe you don't use, maybe you have that feature turned
Yeah.
off. Like who cares? So then the question becomes, so the first part of sort of a more modern GRC engineering mindset is how do you make sure that you're only seeing green and red boxes for stuff that affects you?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just getting your whole report from the producer that has a whole bunch of stuff where you look into something, and this happens in government all the time, an agency information system security officer will get a report from a private company from the cloud service, will be full of red boxes, and they will spend hours digging into them. They will input them into another system. It will be a whole waste of their time. And a significant amount of time, it actually doesn't matter at all. Like they're not using that part of the system. They're not using the things affected, but they have no insight into that. So the first part about getting more meaningful GRC engineering information shared is making sure that the people reviewing that, the people consuming that information only consume information that matters. Okay. So that's a total mindset shift though, right? That's a skill set. Right now, the skill set is I know every way that this box can be read and I've seen it. And I remember back in 2006 when this box was read, this other event, and it led to this other box being read. And that's what people kind of treasure is that red green outlook. How do we move that to where it's shades of gray, where it comes in and you're trying to figure out, all right, I don't even care if this is like a bad thing. I have a way to respond to it. So I'm going to respond to it. And I don't even care if it's red now. I've disabled this other feature over here. I've done this thing. It creates a world where you have to be not so much security focused, compliance focused, but product focused, outcome focused, like capability focused, where the skill set isn't like, I know people, I could do it briefly for a very brief period of my time. I can just like throw out like, oh yeah, AC 217 says this in C. Like that is, that's not a useful skill for security. It has, if you're arguing over what control statements say, you're not arguing about security, full stop, right? On the other hand, if you get this thing and you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, in this situation, it's causing this type of information to be exposed and unencrypted. Do I care about that or not? So it's a long way of saying the skill set has to shift to one that is more intentional, more problem focused, more like what is the actual effect within the product. It means as a security person, you have to understand how the product works, how the product's being used. Like right now, bluntly, in the government, especially, you can be an information system security official that has no idea how people are using the product that you're the information system for, because all you're doing is comparing controls. So you need to
Yeah.
understand how they're using it, what they're using, like all of that, and then understand their product. So I think it opens the door for a more like product focused mindset that's about mission use. And the reason why that matters a lot in government is ultimately government should be based entirely on a mission. It's the same in private sector, but it's like a different kind of intentionality, or the mission is what matters. And the mission can be anything. It doesn't have to be some crazy Navy SEAL stuff. The mission can be making sure that the janitors that are cleaning the bathrooms have a good and clean system to check in that they have cleaned the bathrooms. Like that is a critical mission for a lot of people. And just as important as making sure that the tanks are safely put into their tank houses at night or whatever. So how do we get engineering to care about that mission more than anything? That's what we're focused on. And if we
Yeah.
can make it easier, we take away those checklists, we just take them away and we just stop arguing over the checklists. And we start giving them this like information where they're assessing it and they're saying, like, this might affect this. I need to know if my people are using that. Then we start to shift the mindset towards product. So I see it shifting. I think there's going to be more, like there's going to be multivariate skill sets within this, right? You're going to have your GSC engineering folks that are going to be making sure that the dashboards and the report, like on the consumer side, they're making sure the dashboards, the reports, the information coming in are allocated and filtered and mapped to their needs. Then you're going to have the people that are paying attention to what the users want, understanding the mission, that are feeding that engineering team. Like if you can get to that world, then you maybe have a couple policy and law people on the side that are also like just making sure everything's following all the rules.
Yeah.
But otherwise, everyone's just focused on delivery. They're focused on the mission. They're focused on getting stuff done. And like, who cares if there's 80 red boxes if none of those red boxes matter?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, been pushing a lot on like GRC as a product versus GRC as a project, whereas like different types of outcomes, how you think about your stakeholders. And what you said really, really illustrated that well. And like what you said about like, understanding in depth all the control statements and all that, I'm like, you should think more about control objectives. Like what is actually trying to achieve and how does it look like in your environment versus like you've been super good at like listing all those different things. And I really see that as like, as you said, the new skill set will be more focused towards like deep context on how things are operating in real life and be more risk based. At the end of the day, everything you're saying is going back to risk as the driver, because for me, a lot of the bloat that we think about when think about kind of the federal area is also related to everything has to be green. So you need people to check everything that is like orange or red in any area because there's no risk-based prioritization. And in the private sector, you can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, the underlying, it's so frustrating for me from a cultural standpoint within government, especially within the US government, but also within other enterprises I've been a part of. Like the fundamental principle behind risk management is to optimize how you accept risk. It is not to prevent risk. Like it is to accept risk. It is to make sure that you know what you're doing and that you accept risk, like understanding the impact of that, but it is to accept risk. And that has created, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. I mean, these current, I'll just go into it very briefly, that some of the current laws that exist right now in the United States were based on a situation that happened in the year 2000 where there had been some problems. Congress passed rules that basically said not only do agencies need to make good decisions, but inspectors general need to audit those decisions all of the time. And that created an environment where all of the security programs were focused on ensuring that their audits were green.
Yeah.
Right. And so in order to do that, you don't accept any risk, because somebody from the outside that doesn't have your context, doesn't understand your mission, doesn't understand your agency, they see you and they go, oh, you decided that you were going to turn off multi-factor authentication for that? Like, ding, this is going to Congress. You're bad at your life. And you're like, I didn't have any use case for multi-factor authentication for logging into this thing for dog memes. Like, it doesn't matter. So that is how we created the situation where no risk becomes the desired outcome of risk management. But you cannot operate in a world of like randomness and chaos that happens, right? Like, you just cannot operate in the world with no risk. You can't do that with technology. You can't do that with a business. You can't do that with the government agency.
Yeah.
It
And
breaks
companies
my heart.
exist because of risks, right? They took risks, and that's why companies exist. And I had a couple episodes ago, Tony Martin Veg, he's big on risk quantification. He used to work at Netflix, kind of working on the CRQ program there. And he was saying, like, sometimes your role is to help the company take more risks. And it feels so weird because you can like decision support. You give all the data, and then they end up owning for the decision. But like, to make money, you have to take risks. So in that context, we always bias against like less risk, but that's what creates all those like kind of checklists and blockers. And that's where we don't understand that, life, any decision, taking the plane or just taking out the trash, like all that, they have inherent risk decisions that you made, and someone could die taking out the trash. It's just, we don't think through
all
these.
the time. And that's how you get a situation where you have the director of the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program who sees it as his job to make the government take more risks. Possible risks? Yes. Do we know what we're doing? Yes. But informed? And like, yes. And it kind of goes back to this, just to kind of take it all the way back. Like, the unfortunate reality is that because of the way we're assessing risk, because that is so broken and doesn't actually give us the information we need to assess risk, we're actually opening a ton of risk by trying to prevent risk using this thing where like the incentive is all broken, the data is all broken. We're looking at an incorrect model of the world and saying, well, if this person tells me that they're great and their assessor agrees that they're great, then they're safe and I'm not going to get in trouble for using them. Like, that is, no, I want to know the reality of what is going on in that person's environment daily. And I want them to prove it. And I want them to like be proud of it. I don't want them to just be trying to trick me or hide things from me or anything like that. There's this thing that I learned when I joined the US Digital Service that was, I don't remember who first said it to me, but it's an engineering, a product, a general approach that has always stuck with me, which is like that if you want people to do the right thing, you need to make the right thing easy.
Yeah.
And like, as long as you do that, then they'll do the right thing. And it's the same thing with security outcomes. It's the same thing with risks. Like, if I make it easy for you to report your real, genuine security posture, and I don't punish you for it, and I just let you be real with me, and then share that information with others, then you're more likely to be real with me. And then it seems like the government's taking more risks, but in reality, the government is being more informed when they take those risks because they're not pretending that everything is perfect, and they can just see, okay, I'm okay with this. I'm not okay with that. Like, let's use it for this. Let's not use it for that. Make the right thing, make the secure thing, the easy thing, and everybody benefits.
Yeah, I love that. It's the whole concept of like paved paths and like making sure, the only choice you can make is the secure choice. And what you say about risk is very true. Is like, when we trust third-party attestations and stuff like this instead of getting directly to the source. And It's probably easier in the federal space compared to private because of like IP, legal liability, etc. But when you think about it, it's another risk we take, but we think that risk is not as high because, hey, we have the certificate, we have XYZ, and someone checked something at some point somewhere. But we don't think about those risks because we collectively think that this is a risk worth taking, and that you know I really think it's a very profound way of thinking through the future of compliance. So it's been very interesting. What I wanted to get from you is like, what are some of the success metrics? So we spoke a lot about kind of how you think through the two pathways and potentially slowly, because of course, like as you said very accurately, like those things take time. Is like the adoption by Rev 5 kind of authorized adopting like the 20x approach. How do you think through like 12 months from now, maybe at the speed you're going, maybe 6 months from now, looking back and saying, okay, we've succeeded on our objectives?
I mean, the obvious answer is always just throughput, right? Like the more that have gone through it, the more that are being adopted, the more that are in use, the better. I think the nuance metrics are the things I really care about. And that's things like how many agencies and how often are agencies adopting cloud services for a small number of their people? Because that's something that's really hard right now, right? Is you have this small team that wants to use this, Figma design tool. You don't have to spend $300,000 to do it. You can do it for $5K and you do it, then that's a win. And like, to me, that's going to be the measured outcome, is not just how many go through, how many get authorized, but how many are actually being used by agencies for small use cases that they would have never done before. And then in the long term, it really is just going to boil down to how often, and I wish I could measure this. I don't have a way to measure this, but I can measure it in my heart. How many times per day does someone in the government say we can't use that because it's not FedRAMPed? Because right now, I think that probably happens thousands, if not tens of thousands of times every day
Yeah.
across the entire government. Somebody wants to use something, they ask about it, and they get told, no, we can't use that. It's not FedRAMP. I like that little whisper in the back of my mind. I want to get to where I never hear that. That's my success metric, is when I go to an agency and I talk to engineers, I talk to digital service people, I talk to product people, contractors, like everyone, and they're just like, yeah, we have the tools we need. FedRAMP's awesome. That's
Yeah.
success.
I love that. I love that approach. It's you think about all the productivity gains from like using better tooling from all those small teams, and yeah, what you said about the cost for like kind of small implementations and stuff. When you think about it, like it really kind of impacts the small agile teams that want to move fast and like use. It may be coming from private sector where they're used to like standard tools for their work, and then have to move to something a little bit different. So on the tool side, I was thinking also on the GRC side, because I know I've heard of EMAS and some of the classic tools that are used across government, and I've heard that some of what in the private sector we consider first gen GRC tools, I consider super tech forward in the federal space. I'm also thinking it's a great way also to kind of add more robust and maybe more automated solutions to those teams that they couldn't leverage before.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the kind of ironies of FedRAMP 20X, is that it's optimized to bootstrap GRC engineering and automation tools, right? Like that's who we have in the game. Where people are like, oh, like I got trust centers, I got GRC automation tools, I've got GRC producers, GRC consumers. They all want to be in the game. They all wanted to get into agency use, but there was no use case because everybody's using OG manual spreadsheet style stuff, and maybe best case spreadsheets that are loaded into something like OSCAL, but it's still
Yeah.
a Word doc. It's not like a real automation, methodology. So all these people have this tool that can't effectively be used because there's no way to use it. So we give them the way to use it. And then we say, use your tool, make it work with the way, 20x way, and then we'll authorize you. And then agencies will have access to those tools. Private companies will have access to those tools. Is building an ecosystem. It's like, how many times in the history of the internet has something like this happened, where something that didn't exist was created and then boom, right? We had like mashups in the early 2000s. You had things like Ruby on Rails, didn't exist, boom, comes up, everybody takes it over. You have Amazon, AWS, S3, just the concept of block, that kind of storage out there. CDNs didn't used to exist, boom, they blow up. I think that this is my hope is that this is going to be another thing like this, where once people see that you can actually use a GRC engineering and automation tool as part of a compliance thing to attest to the security, right? And it's not just generating narratives and doing a bunch of clunky stuff, but it's providing business value to you by letting you see gaps in your security process and your engineering and your delivery process that you want to improve. You use that, and then you can share that with people, and you don't have to hire 20 people to create custom reports every month to send out. Like, all of this will happen, and then FedRAMP 20X will be successful. If all that doesn't happen, if all these people with their tools and their brilliant minds, they don't want to get involved in this game, then 20X would have failed. But that's so far what happened, is that a lot of people said, yeah, I want to write a system that does that, and I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to go to market, and they're going to eat the lunch of all of these traditional GRC platforms that are not actually paying attention to movements in the market. And they're like, all these people are going to end up, like these big behemoths that nobody's going to take seriously in 5 years, even though all of the big banks will still use them.
No, yeah, 100%, 100%. I really like to see that speed coming through. In thinking about what's coming next, so we spoke a little bit about like for example, a 20x moderate and stuff like this. But when I think through it, I'm like, if it's a risk-based approach and there's no bar, moderate and high makes no sense in the way I think through this, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And it's one of the most frustrating kind of weird things is that there's a 2006 memo from the NIST that's called FIPS 199 that says the government has to categorize systems into low, moderate, and high. And then it does something that maybe made sense back then, but doesn't make sense now. It created these 3 attributes, right? We're all familiar with: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yes.
But then it said we have to use the highest bar of any of those together. So if you have something that you need super, super secret, but you don't care if it's ever available because you're only going to access it like once a month, you still have to meet all of the high controls for availability. That makes no sense. So I think what we're seeing with 20X, as we built in a moderate, we realize effectively that it's really a matter of degree. When you actually go into those controls and you look at what the differences are between like low, moderate, and high, in most cases, it's kind of what I would call like intensity. Yes, there's 300 more controls, but it's because in the moderate baseline, it says do good things. And then the high baseline says do good things with your family, do good things at home, do good things at work, and it's like, hey, we were good enough with do good things. Like, we don't need to specify all of these other places. And so we build those KSIs, and that's what it looks like. And so I think what we see ourselves leaning towards in the future from a FedRAMP perspective is less of there being these you have to do more controls to get moderate, but rather it's going to be based on the commitment to implementing those controls. So we published just recently, for the first time, different set of ongoing requirements for different impact levels with our vulnerability detection and response policy. And so what that says is if you're a low impact system, for example, and there's a potential massive vulnerability that could just destroy your entire site, you have 4 days to fix it, which is, a lot of people think that's insane, right? 4 days, oh my God. But I'm talking about like anyone on the internet can press a button and blow up your site. Like, that's like a max level thing. You got 4 days to do it because you're low impact. Because if somebody blows up your site, it's a low impact to the government. On the other hand, if you're high, you got to do that in half a day or less. And it's an incident, and you need to like all hands on deck, manage that stuff. And we started to do that as well with the draft key security indicators for phase 2 that we published. And specifically we published yesterday, persistent validation and assessment standard. And that also sets outlines. Is basically like, if you're low, you need to validate the status of your machine-based resources, that they are doing what you think they're supposed to be doing. I think it's once a week. That's not a lot. It's pretty chill. If you're moderate, you got to do it once every 3 days. That's a bit more. We didn't set them for high because we're not doing high yet. But if there is going to be high, it'll probably be like, you got to do them every 2 hours. And like, that's how we start to actually create a different impact level. It's the same rules. It's almost the same requirements. It's just that like how intense you enforce them is different. So I don't care if you're low, moderate, or high. You need to know everybody that works for you. And if you're low, you can make sure that those people are actually who they say they are every like 3 to 6 months. If you're high, you need to be making sure that those people have not been replaced by like a doppelganger probably more often than every 6 months. Like you need to make sure that's actually Jim who's logged in on his vacation in China. That's because that's weird.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, I don't know how you think through this, but like what I think is interesting also, if you think like of that level of intensity per control, it's almost like you could give back the choice to the agency to say, these controls, I actually want high. These ones, low is fine. And potentially each agency can have an ingestion mechanism where they, because maybe they have different risk posture, and of course they handle different types of data and they care about different things. So potentially they can kind of massage the way they think through, okay, these can be moderate, this one's low is fine, these ones I need high for sure. And it creates a custom way of like understanding if I want to onboard that vendor, but at the same time, you're not mandating everything high to have something that be plugged in, right?
And it lets me create competition where like those providers get to compete by that capability, right? So I don't say everybody has to only hire US citizens. But if somebody wants to only hire US citizens, this is a thing that like the Defense Department cares a lot about. If someone wants to only hire US citizens, they can do that and they can attest to it and they can validate that that's what they do. And some people will like that. It will also mean that it costs more. So they will charge more for it. And other people will say, I don't care if you have US citizens or not. I'm going to pay you less and accept the risk of that. And it's just not a thing that was really that you could do when the idea was you have to meet this exact, everybody is the same at this moderate level,
Yeah.
everyone's the same. And that's just so boring because it's not how tech is. It's not how use cases are. It's not how people are. Let's just let people compete based on what they choose to do, as long as they're still making good security decisions overall.
Yeah, it's been fascinating discussion. I've learned quite a lot, especially coming with a background that is a bit less well versed in this. But it's been fascinating because, in a sense, like it's the federal space, but in so many ways, it feels almost more advanced than a lot of things we see in the private sector, which is fascinating to see because the way you think through a lot of these things, we're still trying to, especially with the GRC engineering movement and the manifesto people and everything, we're still trying to get through the private sector to think that way as well. So seeing that champion at the federal level in the US is like super, super cool.
I mean, it's a weird difference of kind of like grassroots versus top down, right? It's like, I have the authority under the law. FedRAMP has the authority to say, we think everyone in the government, everybody wants to sell stuff to the government, should follow the GRC engineering manifesto when it comes to how they're doing security. Like we can do that. And then people are forced to do it. Now I'm very, very, very careful about how I use that because I can just say we can add a requirement that would cause billions of dollars of engineering work, effort, et cetera, across industry, totally inefficient, total waste of money. But if it's something that makes sense, something that works at the grassroots and it's like kind of getting momentum, I can pick that up and say, hey, this matters. Let's focus on this and emphasize that. And so that's what I get to do here. While in private sector, companies that aren't involved with the government, they won't care about any of this. They won't see it. So it is my dearest hope that this can be one of the situations that government is actually leading the way towards a progressive, positive change in the way that all of our outlook is around security that starts bleeding into private sector companies because they want to capture that government market. And then maybe one day somebody will come from a company that has FedRAMP authorized and is going to some startup and says, hey, yo, we should do this stuff because it's really good. Like this GRC engineering thing, like the government maybe do it, but like we should do that at our startup and it will be awesome. Like, so we're both going at it from different ends, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as you said, it's a unique opportunity from your perspective, because if you think about it, if you open it more and everyone can get in and don't have to have a complete dedicated environment for it, then you can actually drive change for all those security programs from the ground up because they want to attest to all those KSIs and focus on that. So you can have an impact that most of the other certifying bodies probably wouldn't have, because the incentive to not do it would be very low because, you kind of attest to how your program really is in practice, which you don't do anywhere else right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, but if you use the Just Engineer Manifesto as a baseline, I'm not liable to anyone that, didn't like one sentence and then ends up causing lots of issues.
Loosely in principle. It's inspiration. I mean, I think it's just really important at going back to kind of the beginning of the conversation about like DevOps, security, compliance. It's really important to ultimately to get the most secure outcomes. The way that we'll do that is by having the person sitting at the desk thinking about how they're going to do something, like what buttons they're going to click, what code they're going to write, what infrastructure diagram they're going to draw. And we want that person thinking about it from a security standpoint. And the best way that we can do that is by just making it a logical, devised part of their career, of their process, where every engineer is trained on that, where they understand it, and they can do that. And like, if you had asked me 20 years ago if I would ever have a serious discussion with a software engineer about how to configure the operating system or a database or something like that, or a network or a DNS server or anything like that, I would have said, no, those are 18 different disciplines. They will never have the same thing. And now you can go out and get somebody that has a perfectly decent understanding of how to make a database performant, how to configure DNS, and how to write code. Why not security too? Let's add security to that.
I agree. Love that. Yeah, it's been fascinating. Any last parting thoughts you want to share with our listeners, just engineering listeners here?
FedRAMP is super weird. The government is, the US government especially, it's a super, super weird place. It's deeply complicated. It has deep cultural differences. It's millions of people, thousands of agencies. It's a scale that's pretty crazy. So as you follow along with FedRAMP, if you see some people talking about it, just remember, like, it takes a minute. And for the FedRAMP folks that are listening to this podcast, because I'm here and don't normally listen to it, this is what I'm talking about. Listen to some of these other episodes. Listen to some of what these people are doing. Like, technology, like, this is all about tech. The whole thing is about tech. It's about getting tech into the hands of businesses, companies, people, etc. Why are we using people to assess the tech when we can use the tech that we're building to assess the tech? Like, let's just let the machines do the work that the machines are supposed to do. And that's what GRC engineering is all about. And like, let's enable that at the compliance level, everywhere, at the business and at the framework level.
I love that. Hey, I can't say anything else than 100% approved. Yeah, it's been fascinating. I think it'll be a great conversation both for people in the just engineering side that want to. Hey, just made for me the federal space a lot more exciting just by understanding like all the changes and how you think through things. I really think the opportunity is huge, and if you work more in the federal space already, kind of understanding also from like what good looks like and what good could look like in the future. I think it's also pretty exciting because I would say it creates a lot of more opportunities and your impact will be higher as well, just because you'll be closer to security and closer to the reality of how things are operating. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's go. This is awesome. What a world, man. We've got AI, we've got tech, we've got automation, we got GRC engineering. Like, let's do it. Pretty soon we're just going to have one person that does everything.
Wow. Okay, let's go. I love that. But yeah, it's been amazing. Following all your updates and everything that is happening. Where can people find if they want to learn more about what you're doing with FedRAMP and like where they can learn more?
Oh yeah, fedramp.gov. It's pretty simple. And then from there you can dig into our community working groups on GitHub and see the strangest thing in the world, which is people working for a government program randomly posting on GitHub discussions about their government program.
I love that. Very new and very cool to see as well. That was super fun. I saw that. That's very cool. Yeah, thanks a lot for tuning in, people. And yeah, thanks a lot, Pete. That was an amazing conversation. Thanks again.
Absolutely.
Take care.